In 1891, a faded photograph surfaced from the depths of a forgotten London attic. The sepia-toned image depicts an 11-year-old boy, Thomas Calder, standing amid a cluttered laboratory filled with glass beakers, tangled wires, and archaic scientific apparatuses. His gaze is resolute, eyes fixed firmly on an unseen point beyond the camera's lens, betraying a maturity that far exceeds his tender years. The photograph, seemingly innocuous at first glance, captures the uneasy intersection of childhood innocence and a precocious obsession with the mysteries of life and death, emblematic of the Victorian era's complex relationship with science and spirituality. Before we embark on the tragic journey of a child scientist whose relentless pursuit to conquer mortality leads him down a dark and perilous path, be sure to subscribe and like the video to keep up with our captivating tales. And let me know in the comments, what thoughts come to mind when you hear about a child attempting to defy death? Thomas Calder's story begins in the heart of late 19th century London, a time when the world was captivated by the rapid pace of technological progress and an equally fervent fascination with the supernatural. The city thrummed with innovation. Gas lamps flickered along fog-choked streets, and the clatter of horse-drawn carriages mingled with the hum of emerging electrical inventions. Amid this backdrop, spiritualism flourished. Seances were common parlors' entertainment, and the possibility of communicating with the dead tantalized the public imagination. It was an era poised precariously between empirical science and the ethereal unknown. Into this charged atmosphere was born Thomas Calder, a boy whose intellect and curiosity defied his age. From an early childhood marked by a voracious appetite for knowledge, Thomas showed an extraordinary inclination toward the sciences, chemistry, anatomy, and the nascent field of electricity in particular. Yet beneath his scholarly demeanor lay a deeper, more troubling obsession that would come to define his brief life. Thomas was consumed by the notion of mortality, death, and the possibility of transcending the finality of human existence. Born in a modest household in East London to John and Mary Calder, Thomas was the youngest of 3 siblings. His parents, artisans of humble means, nurtured their son's intellectual pursuits despite their limited resources. The Calders' home was modest, but filled with books and curiosities, fostering an environment where Thomas could explore his burgeoning interests. By the age of 10, he had already devoured texts on anatomy and electrical engineering, many of which were far beyond what most children of his standing could access or comprehend. His parents marveled at his precocity, but remained unaware of the darker preoccupations that simmered beneath his youthful inquisitiveness. The photograph from 1891 reveals more than just a boy surrounded by instruments. It offers a poignant glimpse into a mind wrestling with the profound questions of existence. Thomas's laboratory was not a mere playroom, but a carefully arranged workshop, where he conducted experiments that blurred the line between innocent inquiry and something far more unsettling. The tools of his trade, electrodes, chemical solutions, dissecting knives, hinted at a desire to unlock secrets that society was not yet ready to confront. Victorian England was a fertile ground for such contradictions. The scientific community was making strides in understanding electricity's potential, with pioneers like Michael Faraday and Thomas Edison pushing the boundaries. Yet, alongside this empirical progress, spiritualists professed to contact the dead through mediums and seances, a phenomenon that captivated the public and sowed confusion between science and superstition. Thomas Calder embodied this paradox, a child scientist whose youthful genius was shadowed by a yearning to pierce the veil of mortality. His obsession with death was not born in isolation. The death of a beloved relative had left an indelible mark on Thomas's young psyche. Soon after the loss, his interests shifted dramatically from mere curiosity to a compulsive drive to understand and ultimately defy the permanence of death. He delved into anatomical studies with an intensity that unsettled both family and neighbors, dissecting animals and collecting specimens under the pretense of scientific exploration. His experiments grew increasingly secretive, conducted in the dim light of a makeshift laboratory, concealed within the family home. Thomas's peers noticed his growing isolation. The boy who once played in the streets now preferred the company of books and laboratory equipment. Whispers circulated of strange noises emanating from the Calder household late into the night. Clinking glass, faint electrical buzzing, and eerie flashes of light. Some speculated that the boy was dabbling in forbidden knowledge, while others dismissed these rumors as fanciful tales born from Victorian superstition. Yet, those who knew Thomas best recognized that his endeavors were driven not by mischief, but by a profound and unsettling ambition. He was said to speak of preparing for something greater, cryptic words that hinted at a purpose beyond the ordinary pursuits of childhood. His experiments, though rudimentary by modern standards, were conducted with a meticulousness that suggested a mind grappling with the very nature of life and death. The photograph captures this duality, the innocence of youth and the weight of an extraordinary burden. Thomas stands poised between two worlds, that of a child still tethered to earthly experiences, and that of a nascent scientist daring to confront questions that would challenge the limits of human understanding. His expression is both determined and haunted, a silent testament to the inner turmoil that defined his days. In the broader context of Victorian society, Thomas's story was both remarkable and emblematic. The late 19th century was a time when children prodigies were celebrated for their intellectual feats, often showcased in public exhibitions and scientific gatherings. Yet, the notion of a child obsessed with death and resurrection was unsettling, provoking a mixture of awe and apprehension. Thomas Calder's journey would soon reveal the perils inherent in such youthful ambition, as he ventured deeper into territories where science and the supernatural intertwined. The photograph from 1891 remains a haunting artifact, a window into a moment when a boy's curiosity stretched beyond the boundaries of conventional childhood. It invites reflection on the Victorian era's uneasy dance between faith and reason, life and death, innocence and obsession. Thomas Calder was not merely a child with a laboratory. He was a symbol of humanity's eternal quest to understand and, if possible, conquer the unknown forces that govern existence. As we peer into this faded image, we glimpse the beginning of a story that is as chilling as it is compelling, a tale of genius, loss, and the haunting desire to transcend the finality of death. Thomas Calder's life, preserved in this solitary photograph, challenges us to consider the delicate balance between youthful wonder and the dangerous allure of forbidden knowledge. It is a story that beckons us to follow him deeper into the shadows of 1891, where science and obsession collide in a desperate attempt to defy the inevitable. In the waning years of the 19th century, London stood at the crossroads of profound transformation. The city was a hive of industrial advancement, where steam engines powered factories and the glow of electric lights began to pierce the pervasive fog. Scientific discovery flourished alongside a growing public fascination with the occult, creating a tension that permeated Victorian society. It was within this charged environment that Thomas Calder's story unfolded, a narrative deeply entwined with the era's complex interplay between empirical knowledge and spiritual mystery. The scientific landscape of 1891 was marked by rapid progress and a burgeoning belief in the potential of human ingenuity. Electricity, once an elusive phenomenon, was becoming a practical force reshaping daily life. The telegraph and telephone revolutionized communication, while inventors and experimenters pushed the boundaries of what machines could achieve. Simultaneously, the public was captivated by spiritualism, a movement that promised contact with the beyond through mediums and seances. This duality between rational science and supernatural curiosity was the backdrop against which Thomas's early life took shape. Born into a modest family in East London, Thomas was raised amid the hum of this technological and cultural upheaval. His parents, John and Mary Calder, were artisans who eked out a living through skilled but humble trades. Despite their limited means, they recognized and nurtured their son's extraordinary intellect. The Calders were neither wealthy nor formally educated, but their home was filled with books acquired second-hand or gifted by neighbors, tomes on natural philosophy, anatomy, and mechanics that would fuel Thomas's insatiable curiosity. Thomas's childhood was a blend of typical boyhood experiences and the extraordinary. While other children played in the crowded streets or attended local schools, Thomas was often found engrossed in makeshift experiments crafted from scavenged materials. His rooms were cluttered with glass vials, wires, and hand-drawn diagrams that mapped out the principles of electricity and life's anatomy. His parents, though proud, remained somewhat bewildered by the depth and intensity of his pursuits, unable to fully grasp the scientific nuances that occupied his mind. The Victorian era, with its strict social hierarchies and moral codes, was not always accommodating to such precocity. Child prodigies were celebrated in certain circles, especially in music and the arts, but a boy deeply engrossed in scientific experimentation was a rarity, particularly within working-class neighborhoods. Thomas's talents set him apart, isolating him from peers who neither shared nor understood his passions. His social interactions diminished as his intellectual world expanded, a solitude that both enabled and deepened his fixation on the mysteries he sought to unravel. Education for children like Thomas was often limited, but his parents made efforts to provide him with what resources they could. He attended a local school where his aptitude for mathematics and science quickly became apparent. Teachers noted his remarkable memory and analytical skills, yet Thomas was often distracted by thoughts far beyond the standard curriculum. His notebooks, discovered years later, reveal sketches of anatomical structures interwoven with rudimentary electrical circuits, an unusual combination hinting at his unique approach to understanding life. London itself was a city of contrasts, where industrial progress coexisted uneasily with poverty and disease. The air was thick with soot, and the crowded living conditions bred both resilience and despair among its inhabitants. For Thomas, these surroundings were a source of both inspiration and dread. The prevalence of illness and death within his community sharpened his awareness of mortality from an early age. He witnessed firsthand the fragility of life, a reality that propelled his scientific inquiries beyond mere curiosity into the realm of urgent necessity. Within the intellectual climate of the time, young inventors and child scientists occasionally captured public attention. Victorian society held a fascination with prodigious talent, often parading youthful geniuses in exhibitions and public lectures. Yet, these children were typically guided by mentors and operated within established frameworks of learning. Thomas, in contrast, pursued knowledge largely on his own terms, driven by an inner compulsion rather than external acclaim. His experiments were private affairs, conducted in the shadows of his family's cramped home, away from the scrutiny that might have tempered his more dangerous impulses. The Calders' modest home became a sanctuary and laboratory, a place where Thomas could immerse himself in the study of life's mechanisms and the forces that governed existence. His early experiments showed a precocious grasp of electrical principles, albeit rudimentary. He fashioned homemade batteries, constructed simple circuits, and explored the effects of electrical stimulation on biological tissues. These activities were informed by the popular scientific literature of the day, which often blurred the boundaries between legitimate inquiry and speculative theories about life and death. Thomas's ambition extended beyond the accepted limits of childhood science. He sought to unravel not just the workings of the body, but the very essence of life itself. This quest was fueled by a growing philosophical and spiritual curiosity, shaped in part by the Victorian fascination with spiritualism. The possibility that electricity or some undiscovered force could bridge the divide between life and death captivated his imagination. His notebooks reveal a young mind wrestling with profound questions. Could life be sparked anew? Was death reversible through scientific means? This era's blend of scientific optimism and mystical yearning provided fertile ground for Thomas's developing worldview. He was not merely a child fascinated with gadgets, but a thinker grappling with existential dilemmas. His intellectual isolation, compounded by the lack of formal guidance, allowed his ideas to evolve unchecked, drifting toward the edge of accepted science and into the realm of speculation. Thomas's experiments, though modest in scale, hinted at a dangerous intersection of knowledge and obsession. The social fabric of Victorian London offered little support for a child like Thomas. His family, while supportive, lacked the means or expertise to channel his talents safely. Community members regarded his pursuits with a mix of curiosity and unease, their perceptions shaped by the era's ambivalent attitudes toward science and the supernatural. To many, Thomas was an enigma, a boy too serious, too withdrawn, too consumed by thoughts that belonged to adults, wrestling with the mysteries of existence. Despite these challenges, Thomas's early years were marked by a relentless pursuit of understanding. His intellect blossomed in the confluence of Victorian scientific achievement and the era's spiritual anxieties. The world around him, teetering between faith and reason, doubt and discovery, became the stage for a young prodigy's quest to unlock secrets that eluded even the most learned minds of his time. As Thomas Calder moved from childhood into the precipice of adolescence, his story was set against a London that mirrored his own contradictions, brimming with promise and shadowed by uncertainty. The city's streets, laboratories, and parlors echoed with the sounds of innovation and superstition alike, a fitting backdrop for a boy whose life would soon reflect the era's most profound tensions. In this crucible of change, Thomas's journey was only beginning. The foundations laid during these formative years, his modest upbringing, exposure to the scientific fervor of the age, and immersion in the mysteries of life and death, would shape the path he was destined to follow. The boy in the photograph, with his eyes fixed beyond the familiar, was poised to challenge the boundaries of childhood and the limits of human understanding in a world caught between the tangible and the transcendent. The turning point in Thomas Calder's young life came with a heartbreak that would forever alter the course of his thoughts and actions. The loss of a beloved family member, a close relative whose presence had been a steady comfort, plunged the boy into an abyss of grief and existential dread. It was in the shadow of this personal tragedy that Thomas's fascination with mortality deepened into a consuming obsession, driving him toward a relentless quest to unravel the mysteries of life after death. Before this loss, Thomas's scientific inquiries had been broad and exploratory, a child's innocent curiosity channeled into experiments with electricity and anatomy. But the death carved a fissure in his understanding of the world, transforming abstract notions of life and death into urgent, tangible problems to solve. The void left by his relative's absence became a haunting presence in his mind, fueling a desperate desire to find a way to bridge the chasm that separated the living from the dead. Thomas's studies intensified with a singular focus. He devoured medical texts on human anatomy, dissecting every chapter with an intensity that alarmed his family. His notebooks from this period reveal detailed sketches of the nervous system and muscular structure, coupled with annotations on the flow of electrical impulses in the body. He was piecing together, in his youthful mind, a blueprint of life's physical mechanisms, convinced that understanding the body's electrical nature was key to conquering death. This period saw Thomas's experiments take on a darker hue. No longer content with theoretical study, he began conducting practical trials on small animals, rats, birds, and the occasional stray cat, captured from the streets around his home. These experiments were carried out in the dim confines of his makeshift laboratory, an attic space converted into a workshop filled with glass jars, wires, and crude electrical apparatus. With a mixture of scientific rigor and emotional detachment, Thomas subjected his animal subjects to electrical stimulation, observing muscular twitches and reflexive movements with a clinical eye. Neighbors soon whispered of strange sounds and eerie lights emanating from the Calder household during the late hours. Clinks of glass, faint electrical crackles, and occasional animal cries, muffled by the thick walls. To some, these noises were the byproduct of a boy's innocent tinkering. To others, they hinted at something more unsettling. Thomas himself remained inscrutable, often retreating into silence, his thoughts seemingly elsewhere. Those close to him noticed a growing distance, as if he were preparing himself for a purpose beyond their comprehension. As his experiments grew more ambitious, Thomas immersed himself in the emerging scientific theories of his time. The works of pioneers like Luigi Galvani and Alessandro Volta, who had explored bioelectricity and galvanism, were among his prized references. He became fascinated by the idea that electricity was the vital force animating living beings, a concept that blurred the line between physical science and philosophical speculation. For Thomas, electricity was not merely a phenomenon to be studied. It was the key to unlocking life itself. His growing obsession carried him into the realm of chemistry, where he experimented with electrical currents and chemical solutions, hoping to stimulate life or consciousness. He mixed various compounds, some harmless, others more hazardous, attempting to create conditions that might reanimate or preserve organic tissue. These trials were not without risk, and his family often found themselves fearful of the potential consequences, though they lacked the knowledge to intervene effectively. Thomas's intellectual isolation deepened as the intensity of his work increased. Friends and classmates drifted away, unable to relate to the boy consumed by morbid fascination. His demeanor became more secretive. He spoke little of his experiments, except in cryptic phrases hinting at a grand design. "I am preparing for something greater," he once told a neighbor who inquired about the strange activity in the house. The ambiguity of these words only fueled rumors and speculation. Despite his youth, Thomas exhibited remarkable discipline and methodical thinking. He kept detailed journals, documenting his experiments with precision unusual for someone so young. His notes combined empirical observations with philosophical musings, reflecting a mind wrestling not only with scientific challenges, but with the ethical and metaphysical implications of his work. The duality of his approach, a blend of detached analysis and emotional turmoil, painted a portrait of a child, both gifted and burdened. In his pursuit to understand and perhaps reverse death, Thomas also explored the burgeoning field of anatomy beyond textbooks. He scoured local markets and alleys for specimens, driven by an urgency to observe and manipulate living tissue firsthand. Stories circulated of him retrieving dead animals to dissect and experiment upon, further alienating him from neighbors who viewed such behavior with suspicion and unease. The cultural context of Victorian England added layers of complexity to Thomas's pursuits. The era was marked by a paradoxical blend of faith in scientific progress and a persistent belief in spiritual mysteries. The public was fascinated by seances and mediums, eager to believe in life beyond death, despite the rationalist tide sweeping through academia. Thomas's experiments straddled this divide, grounded in scientific method, yet haunted by the hope of transcending mortality, a hope that mirrored the era's collective ambivalence. Thomas's growing immersion in electrical theory and anatomy culminated in a series of increasingly complex experiments. He devised rudimentary electrical stimulators, fashioned from copper wire and crude batteries, to apply controlled currents to animal muscles. These experiments produced startling results: twitching limbs, momentary spasms, and reflexive movements that seemed to breathe fleeting life into otherwise inert bodies. To Thomas, these fleeting signs were proof that life's spark could be manipulated, even rekindled. Yet beneath these scientific endeavors lurked a deeper, more troubling undercurrent. Thomas's detachment during experiments raised questions about his emotional state. His fascination with death was not merely intellectual. It was intertwined with grief, loss, and a desperate yearning to reverse fate. His behavior grew erratic at times, oscillating between moments of intense focus and episodes of withdrawal. Family members noted his pale complexion and hollow eyes, signs that his obsession was exacting a toll on his health. The neighborhood's perception of Thomas shifted in tandem with his transformation. Once a curious and bright boy, he became an enigmatic figure, the subject of whispered conjecture and wary glances. Tales of his nocturnal experiments and the sounds emanating from his home fed into local superstitions about dabbling in forbidden knowledge. Yet, no one fully understood the depth of his scientific ambitions or the profound grief that drove them. In the privacy of his laboratory, Thomas continued to push boundaries. His experiments, nascent and crude as they were, marked the beginning of a desperate attempt to pierce the veil of death. The boy who once marveled at the wonders of electricity now sought to harness it as a tool against the inevitable, a quest that would soon lead him into uncharted and perilous territory. This chapter of Thomas Calder's life reveals a poignant and unsettling transformation. From a bright child fascinated by the natural world, to a young scientist consumed by the shadow of loss and the desperate hope of resurrection. His journey was no longer one of innocent discovery, but of a profound struggle against the finality of death, a struggle that would shape the tragic path ahead. As the years wore on, the icky intensity of Thomas's fixation foreshadowed the extraordinary and harrowing experiments yet to come. His story, rooted in the scientific fervor and spiritual anxieties of Victorian England, was moving toward a climax where childhood genius collided with the human desire to conquer mortality itself. As Thomas Calder's experiments grew in complexity, so too did the veil of isolation that enveloped him. The boy who had once been a curious and lively presence in his East London neighborhood gradually retreated into the shadows of his makeshift laboratory, where the boundaries between scientific inquiry and obsession blurred into something darker and more unsettling. Reports began to circulate among neighbors and acquaintances. Strange noises, flickering lights, and a pervasive sense of unease that seemed to emanate from the Calder household during the late hours. The laboratory itself was a cramped attic space, cluttered with an array of glass jars, wires, chemical bottles, and rudimentary electrical devices cobbled together from scavenged parts. Thomas had become adept at creating crude yet functional apparatuses, batteries fashioned from copper and zinc plates, insulated wires stripped from discarded telegraph lines, and small electrodes intended for experimental stimulation. These tools were employed in experiments that increasingly tested the limits of both his scientific understanding and his emotional resilience. Neighbors reported hearing the clatter of glassware and the faint hum of electrical currents well into the night. On occasion, eerie flashes of light were said to flicker through the attic windows, casting unsettling shadows on the surrounding walls. Some claimed to have heard distressed animal cries, muffled by thick doors and heavy curtains, fueling rumors that Thomas's experiments had crossed ethical boundaries. The local children, once companions in play, now avoided the Calder home, whispering tales of a boy playing with death and summoning spirits. Despite these growing concerns, Thomas remained largely inaccessible, his social withdrawal deepening as his fixation intensified. Family members described him as a figure consumed by purpose, his eyes distant and his manner detached. He spoke little of his work, offering cryptic explanations that hinted at a grand, incomprehensible design. "I am preparing for something greater," he confided to a close neighbor who dared to inquire, a phrase that both intrigued and unsettled those who heard it. Thomas's detachment was not merely social, but emotional. His experiments on animals, once conducted with a clinical curiosity, now bore traces of a chilling indifference. Observers noted his calm demeanor, even as he subjected small creatures to electrical stimulation, provoking involuntary spasms and convulsions. This cold precision was a stark departure from the empathy expected of a child, and it revealed a mind increasingly consumed by the mechanics of life and death rather than their moral implications. The scientific rigor of Thomas's approach was remarkable for his age. He meticulously recorded each trial, noting voltages applied, duration of stimulation, and observed responses. His notebooks from this period are a blend of empirical data and philosophical reflections, revealing a young mind wrestling with profound questions. Could electricity be harnessed to restore life? Was there a formula, a combination of forces that could reverse death's finality? Thomas's experiments were informed by contemporary scientific discourse, albeit filtered through the lens of personal tragedy and youthful determination. He immersed himself in the writings of galvanists and physiologists, drawing inspiration from experiments that demonstrated the responsiveness of muscle tissue to electrical currents. Yet, his ambitions extended beyond simple muscular response. He sought to reanimate whole organisms, to rekindle the spark of life itself. This obsession placed Thomas at odds with the social and ethical norms of his time. Victorian England, while enamored with scientific progress, maintained strict boundaries regarding experimentation, especially involving living creatures. The boy's secretive activities, conducted without adult supervision or consent, were fraught with risk, not only to his subjects, but to himself and his family. Still, the Calders, constrained by ignorance and affection, struggled to intervene meaningfully. The neighborhood's growing unease was compounded by Thomas's increasing isolation. Friends and schoolmates drifted away, unable to comprehend or accept the boy's morbid preoccupations. Teachers noted his declining participation in class and his distracted demeanor. The once bright child was becoming a solitary figure, lost in a world of wires and chemicals that few could penetrate. Amid this solitude, Thomas's confidence in his work seemed to grow. He experimented not only with animals, but with mechanical devices designed to simulate life's processes. He constructed rudimentary electrical circuits intended to mimic the nervous system's impulses, hoping to discover a key that might unlock the secret of reanimation. His efforts were marked by a precocious understanding of electrical conduction and bioelectricity, concepts that were at the forefront of scientific inquiry, yet still shrouded in mystery. Yet, for all his meticulous preparation, Thomas's experiments were tinged with an eerie sense of foreboding. The flickering lights and strange noises were not merely byproducts of scientific endeavor, but seemed to herald something more profound, a crossing of thresholds between life and death, science and superstition. The boy's own demeanor reflected this tension. He was at once a scientist and a figure haunted by the very forces he sought to command. The local community's response was a mixture of fear, fascination, and pity. Some viewed Thomas as a tragic genius, a child driven by grief and intellect to confront the ultimate unknown. Others whispered of darker possibilities, imagining that his experiments might invite malevolent forces or unleash consequences beyond human control. The boundary between curiosity and fear blurred, casting a pall over the Calder household. Within the family, the strain was palpable. John and Mary Calder watched helplessly as their son slipped further from their reach, his world shrinking to the confines of his attic laboratory. Attempts to engage him in ordinary life were met with silence or cryptic replies. The boy who had once been their lively child now seemed consumed by a mission they neither understood nor could halt. Thomas's declaration that he was preparing for something greater took on a chilling resonance. It suggested a purpose beyond mere scientific inquiry, a sense of destiny or a premonition of events yet to unfold. This phrase would later be recalled by those who knew him as a haunting glimpse into the boy's inner world, a world where childhood innocence had been eclipsed by a burden of knowledge and a yearning to transcend mortal limits. The attic laboratory, once a place of innocent experimentation, had become a crucible of isolation and obsession. Within its cramped walls, Thomas Calder conducted his nocturnal rites, applying electrical currents to animal muscles, mixing chemical solutions, and refining his devices. Each experiment brought him closer to the edge of understanding, but also deeper into a psychological labyrinth from which there was no easy escape. In the quiet hours, as London slept beneath a smog-choked sky, the Calder household bore witness to a drama both scientific and tragic. The clinking of glass, the hum of electricity, and the occasional cry of disturbed creatures echoed through the night, marking the passage of a boy's descent from innocent curiosity into a realm where the pursuit of knowledge collided with the darkest fears of mortality. This period of Thomas's life stands as a testament to the perilous path of youthful genius, unmoored from guidance and restraint. His growing isolation, secretive experiments, and eerie proclamations painted the portrait of a child caught between worlds, between the promise of scientific discovery and the abyss of obsession. It was a stage set for the extraordinary and harrowing events that would soon follow, as Thomas sought to transform his grief and intellect into a power that might defy death itself. The crescendo of Thomas Calder's youthful experiments culminated in a desperate and harrowing act that would forever mark the final chapter of his short life. Driven by an unyielding obsession to conquer death, Thomas turned his investigative gaze inward, attempting a rudimentary resurrection, not on animals, but on himself. This act of audacity unfolded in the shadowed confines of his attic laboratory, a place where science, grief, and reckless hope collided with chilling consequences. In the weeks leading up to this fateful experiment, Thomas's demeanor grew increasingly erratic and withdrawn. Family members observed a pallor settling over his once vibrant complexion, and his eyes carried a haunted intensity that spoke of sleepless nights and fervent calculation. His cryptic assertions about preparing for something greater took on a grave weight, suggesting that his experiments had reached a critical and irreversible stage. Thomas's final endeavor was inspired by his studies of electrical stimulation and its effects on muscle and nerve tissue. He had meticulously constructed a device capable of delivering controlled electrical currents, fashioned from copper coils, glass insulators, and crude batteries scavenged from discarded telegraph parts. This apparatus, while primitive by scientific standards, represented the culmination of his youthful ingenuity and desperate hope. The experiment itself was as audacious as it was perilous. Thomas sought to apply electrical currents directly to his own body, aiming to stimulate what he believed to be the vital spark that animated life. The act was both a scientific trial and a ritualistic confrontation with mortality, a personal attempt to defy the finality that had haunted him since the death of his relative. On the night of the experiment, those in the Calder household were unaware of the full extent of Thomas's intentions. The boy had sealed himself in the attic laboratory, surrounded by his instruments and notes, his resolve steeled by months of preparation. Neighbors later reported hearing unusual sounds, low hums, intermittent crackles, and the faint scent of burnt wire emanating from the house, though no one suspected the gravity of what unfolded within. When Thomas's parents finally gained access to the attic, they found their son in a state that defied easy explanation. He was semi-conscious, slumped amidst tangled wires and broken glass, his body bearing marks of self-inflicted injuries consistent with electrical burns. His breathing was shallow, and his pulse weak but perceptible, a fragile thread of life, tenuously clinging to existence. The family's horror was matched by a desperate urgency to save him. Local physicians were summoned, their initial assessments a mixture of bewilderment and concern. The boy's physical condition confounded simple diagnosis. His injuries were both consistent with electrical shock and suggestive of prolonged self-experimentation. Medically, Thomas was in a precarious state, caught between unconsciousness and fragile awareness. News of the incident quickly spread through the community, capturing public imagination and stirring a complex mixture of fear, fascination, and sympathy. Newspapers seized upon the story, dubbing Thomas the child scientist who tried to defy death, their sensational accounts painting a portrait of a prodigy driven to madness by grief and ambition. The press, coverage, though often exaggerated, reflected broader societal anxieties about the limits of scientific exploration and the ethical boundaries of experimentation. Medical professionals faced a dilemma in responding to Thomas's condition. While his physical injuries demanded immediate care, his mental state revealed deeper challenges. The boy exhibited signs of psychological distress, vacillating between moments of lucidity and episodes of confusion. Physicians struggled to balance scientific curiosity with the need for compassionate treatment, recognizing that Thomas's ordeal was as much a matter of mind as body. In the hospital specializing in nervous disorders, where Thomas was admitted, doctors documented his case with meticulous attention. They observed his responses to stimuli, his fluctuating consciousness, and the physical manifestations of his self-inflicted trauma. Throughout their examinations, they noted the extraordinary combination of intellectual brilliance and psychological fragility that defined the boy. Despite intensive medical care, Thomas's condition remained precarious. His body bore the scars of his reckless pursuit, and his mind was burdened by the unresolved questions that had driven him to such extremes. His journals, recovered after his admission, revealed a haunting narrative, cryptic reflections on mortality, scientific notes interwoven with personal sorrow, and an acceptance of the limits he had yet to overcome. The family's ordeal was compounded by public scrutiny. Thomas's story became a cautionary tale, a reflection of Victorian society's conflicted attitudes toward youthful genius and the dangers of unbridled ambition. His parents faced both sympathy and judgment from their community, caught between pride in their son's intellect and fear for his well-being. In his final days, Thomas continued to grapple with the profound mysteries that had consumed him. His writings hinted at a lingering hope, an aspiration that science might one day unlock the secrets of life and death, even if he himself had failed. These reflections were tinged with a melancholic resignation, a poignant acknowledgement of mortality that belied his tender age. Thomas Calder's fateful experiment stands as a stark testament to the perilous intersection of childhood genius, grief, and the human desire to transcend the inevitable. His attempt to apply electrical stimulation to his own body was both an act of scientific curiosity and a desperate plea against death's finality, a tragic embodiment of Victorian-era tensions between progress and the unknown. The aftermath of the experiment left an indelible mark on those who witnessed it. For the medical community, it was a case study in the ethical complexities of treating prodigious yet vulnerable minds. For the public, it was a story that stirred awe and apprehension, a reminder of the fragile boundary between genius and obsession. Thomas's journey, marked by brilliance and tragedy, invites reflection on the limits of human ambition and the profound impact of loss on youthful innocence. His story, preserved through hospital records, journal entries, and the haunting photograph that captured his somber gaze, remains a poignant chapter in the history of scientific endeavor and the human spirit's relentless quest to understand, and perhaps conquer, the final frontier of death. Following the harrowing events that left young Thomas Calder in a fragile state, his admission to a specialized hospital marked the beginning of a new chapter in his tragic journey, a chapter defined by medical curiosity, ethical dilemmas, and the Victorian public's fascination with a child whose ambitions had collided brutally with the limits of human frailty. The institution that took Thomas in was renowned for treating nervous disorders, a place where science and care intersected amid the challenges posed by cases that defied easy explanation. Upon arrival, Thomas presented an unusual clinical picture. Physically weakened by his self-inflicted electrical injuries, he bore scars and burns that told a silent story of desperation and experimentation. Yet it was his mental condition that perplexed physicians most. He oscillated between moments of lucidity, when his sharp intellect shone through, and intervals of confusion and withdrawal, hallmarks of a mind overwhelmed by trauma and obsession. These fluctuations complicated diagnosis and treatment, demanding a delicate balance of medical intervention and psychological support. The hospital's chief physicians, intrigued by the boy's extraordinary case, undertook extensive examinations. They documented his responses to stimuli, noting his remarkable memory and intellectual capability despite his impaired physical state. Thomas's interactions with staff were marked by moments of clarity, during which he spoke in measured tones about his experiments and the questions that had driven him. Yet, these moments were interspersed with silence and signs of profound inner turmoil. physicians found themselves torn between scientific curiosity and ethical responsibility. Thomas was not merely a patient. He was a prodigy whose case posed profound questions about the nature of childhood genius and the boundaries of medical intervention. His condition challenged contemporary understandings of mental health and neurological function, prompting debates within the medical community about appropriate care and the risks of further experimentation. Throughout his hospitalization, Thomas maintained a journal that revealed the depths of his intellect and the complexity of his emotional state. His writings blended scientific observations with personal reflections, offering insights into a mind grappling with the mysteries of life and death. These documents became invaluable to physicians who sought to comprehend the motivations and mental processes underlying his actions. The public, meanwhile, responded to Thomas's story with a mixture of fascination and fear. Newspaper accounts sensationalized his attempts to defy death, portraying him as both a tragic figure and a cautionary tale. Headlines proclaimed the child scientist who tried to cheat mortality, captivating readers with the drama of a boy whose intellect had propelled him beyond the safe bounds of childhood. Such coverage reflected Victorian society's ambivalent attitudes towards science and the supernatural, blending admiration for youthful genius with anxiety over its potential dangers. Community reactions were equally complex. Some sympathized deeply with the Calder family, recognizing the tragedy of a brilliant child overwhelmed by grief and ambition. Others whispered of madness and hubris, viewing Thomas's experiments as reckless and unnatural. This social pressure added another layer of difficulty for the family and medical staff, who navigated public curiosity while striving to protect the boy's dignity and well-being. Within the hospital, Thomas's condition remained precarious. Despite attentive care, his physical health declined gradually, undermined by the injuries sustained during his final experiment and the toll of psychological distress. Medical interventions focused on stabilizing his physical state while attempting to provide a supportive environment for mental recovery. Physicians employed emerging therapies of the time, including rest, nutrition, and gentle stimulation, though the limitations of contemporary medicine constrained their effectiveness. The ethical challenges of Thomas's case extended beyond treatment to considerations of consent and autonomy. As a child, his capacity to understand and agree to interventions was limited, yet his intellectual maturity complicated standard approaches. Doctors grappled with respecting his agency while ensuring his safety, aware that his precocious mind was entwined with vulnerability and trauma. Thomas's interactions with hospital staff revealed glimpses of his enduring curiosity. When lucid, he engaged in discussions about his experiments, expressing a yearning to comprehend the forces that govern life. These exchanges highlighted the tension between his scientific ambition and the profound emotional pain that underpinned it. Staff members noted his resilience and the tragic poignancy of a boy so young yet burdened with questions that had long eluded even seasoned scientists. As weeks passed, Thomas's condition stabilized, but showed little sign of recovery. His physical frailty persisted, and his mental state remained fragile. The boy's journals, carefully preserved by physicians, became a testament to his intellect and the complexity of his inner world, documents that would later inform early psychological studies and medical reflections on childhood genius and trauma. The Calder family, though devastated, remained present throughout Thomas's hospitalization. Their support was a source of comfort amid the clinical environment, though they struggled with feelings of helplessness and sorrow. The community's divided response weighed heavily on them, as public fascination often bordered on intrusion. Yet, they clung to hope, however faint, that their son might find peace or understanding within the hospital's walls. Thomas's story, unfolding within the corridors of the hospital, resonated beyond the immediate medical context. It became emblematic of broader Victorian anxieties about the boundaries of science, the nature of childhood, and the limits of human ambition. His case prompted discussions among physicians, philosophers, and the public about the ethical dimensions of experimentation and the care owed to those whose intellect and vulnerability intersect. Newspapers and pamphlets circulated accounts of Thomas's plight, often blending fact with speculation. Some commentators framed him as a visionary ahead of his time, while others cautioned against the dangers of youthful overreach. This discourse reflected the era's struggle to reconcile faith in scientific progress with lingering fears of the unknown, a struggle embodied in the figure of a boy whose genius had propelled him into dangerous realms. Medical professionals involved in Thomas's care documented his case extensively, recognizing its significance for the emerging fields of psychiatry and neurology. Their observations contributed to early understandings of the interplay between intellectual precocity, psychological distress, and physical health. Thomas's case highlighted the need for compassionate, multidisciplinary approaches to treatment, especially for patients whose conditions defied conventional categorization. Throughout his time in the hospital, Thomas remained a figure of both mystery and empathy. His intellect, so formidable in youth, was tempered by the fragility imposed by his ordeal. The boy who had once sought to unlock the secrets of life and death now confronted the limits imposed by his own body and mind, a poignant reminder of the delicate balance between ambition and vulnerability. The public fascination with Thomas Calder did not wane, even as his condition deteriorated. His story was retold in scientific circles and popular media alike, inspiring debate and reflection. For many, he became a symbol of the tragic consequences that could arise when youthful genius collided with grief and the human desire to transcend mortality. Within the hospital's walls, the legacy of Thomas's brief but extraordinary life began to take shape. His case would inform future studies and ethical considerations, serving as a somber example of the complexities inherent in the pursuit of knowledge at the boundaries of human experience. Through the dedicated efforts of medical professionals and the enduring interest of society, Thomas Calder's story continued to resonate as a testament to the interplay of science, suffering, and the indomitable spirit of inquiry. As Thomas Calder's days in the hospital unfolded, his physical condition steadily declined, despite the best efforts of the medical staff. The injuries from his final experiment, compounded by the strain of psychological distress, left him frail and weakened. Yet even as his body faltered, his mind continued to grapple with the profound questions that had defined his brief life, a struggle poignantly captured in his final journal entries. These writings, discovered among his personal effects, reveal a haunting blend of scientific reflection and emotional resignation. Thomas wrestled openly with the mysteries of life and death, documenting his experiments alongside contemplations on mortality's inevitability. His words convey both a fierce determination to understand the forces that govern existence and a somber acknowledgement of his own limitations. In passages marked by a fragile clarity, he expressed a yearning for knowledge that transcended his physical constraints, a desire to reconcile the promise of science with the finality he had sought to overcome. Physicians who cared for Thomas were struck by the depth and maturity of his reflections. Though the boy's body was weakened, his intellectual vigor endured, even as he faced the reality of his declining health. His journals became a testament to a mind both brilliant and burdened, a poignant record of a child who had dared to confront death itself, and in doing so, had glimpsed the boundaries of human understanding. As his strength waned, Thomas's interactions with caregivers and family grew more intermittent. Moments of lucidity were often accompanied by fading consciousness, the delicate thread of life fraying with each passing day. Those around him witnessed the tragic contrast between the boy's youthful potential and the relentless advance of mortality. His final days were marked by a quiet acceptance, a surrender to the fate he had so desperately tried to defy. The medical staff documented these last stages with a mixture of clinical detachment and empathetic sorrow. They noted the gradual loss of motor function, the weakening pulse, and the diminishing responses to stimuli. Yet, they also recorded instances of lucid thought and communication, underscoring the complex interplay between body and mind in Thomas's condition. These observations contributed to early understandings of the physiological and psychological dimensions of trauma and terminal illness. Family members remained a constant presence, their grief tempered by a desire to provide comfort and dignity in Thomas's final moments. The Calders, confronted with the loss of a son whose brilliance had shone so brightly and briefly, grappled with the magnitude of their sorrow. Their support offered a measure of solace amid the clinical atmosphere of the hospital, a humanizing force in an environment focused on treatment and observation. The broader community, informed by newspaper, reports, and whispered conversations, followed Thomas's decline with a mixture of sympathy and fascination. His story had become emblematic of the tensions inherent in Victorian society's relationship with science, childhood genius, and mortality. Public interest did not wane, even as the boy's life approached its end, reflecting a collective grappling with questions of ambition, loss, and the limits of human endeavor. In the hospital's quiet rooms, Thomas's passing was marked with a solemnity befitting the gravity of his journey. His death, though peaceful, closed a chapter filled with extraordinary promise and profound tragedy. The boy who had sought to unlock the secrets of life and death left behind not only a physical absence, but a legacy that would challenge and inspire those who encountered his story. His final notes, preserved by physicians and family alike, became a focal point for discussion and reflection. Scholars and early psychologists examined his writings, seeking to understand the interplay between his intellectual gifts and the psychological burdens he bore. Thomas's case raised enduring questions about the nature of genius, the impact of grief on the developing mind, and the ethical considerations surrounding youthful ambition in the face of mortality. The medical community, informed by Thomas's experience, began to advocate for more nuanced approaches to treating children with exceptional intellects and psychological vulnerabilities. His story underscored the necessity of balancing encouragement of intellectual curiosity with safeguards against the potential for obsession and self-harm. In this way, Thomas Calder's life contributed to the evolving discourse on pediatric mental health and the responsibilities of caregivers and society. Beyond the clinical and academic realms, Thomas's narrative resonated as a human story of loss and the universal confrontation with death. His youthful hope and tragic demise embodied the fragile boundary between life's promise and its inevitable end, a boundary that science, no matter how advanced, could not yet fully transcend. His journey became a symbol of the eternal human struggle to understand and, if possible, overcome the finality that defines existence. The memory of Thomas Calder persisted in the community and among those who had followed his story. His photograph, capturing a boy whose gaze bore the weight of extraordinary knowledge and sorrow, remained a haunting reminder of a life lived in the tension between innocence and ambition. This image, alongside his journals and medical records, formed a mosaic of a prodigy whose brief existence challenged contemporary understandings of the human mind and spirit. As the years passed, Thomas's story inspired debates and reinterpretations, framing him variously as a tragic figure, a visionary, and a cautionary tale. His life and death became a touchstone for discussions about the limits of science, the vulnerabilities of childhood, and the profound mysteries that remain at the heart of human experience. The unresolved questions he posed continued to invite exploration and reflection, beckoning future generations to consider the delicate balance between knowledge and wisdom, ambition and humility. In this final chapter of his life, Thomas Calder's journey encapsulates the poignant intersection of youthful genius, grief, and the inexorable reality of mortality. His legacy challenges us to honor the complexity of the human mind and spirit, to recognize the depth of pain that can accompany extraordinary talent, and to approach the mysteries of life and death with both courage and compassion. In the years following Thomas Calder's untimely death at the age of 12, his story transcended the confines of a single family tragedy to become a subject of enduring fascination and scholarly inquiry. The boy whose youthful curiosity and grief had propelled him into uncharted scientific territory left behind a legacy that would challenge early psychologists, historians of science, and ethicists alike, sparking debates that continue to resonate in modern discourse. Thomas's journals and the extensive medical documentation collected during his hospitalization became foundational texts in the study of childhood prodigy and psychological trauma. Early psychologists, intrigued by the intricate interplay of intellect and vulnerability evident in his case, examined his writings to better understand how grief and obsession could shape a young mind. His detailed experiments and philosophical musings provided rare insight into the cognitive and emotional development of a child grappling with complex existential questions far beyond his years. Historians of science found in Thomas's story a poignant illustration of Victorian England's turbulent relationship with progress and superstition. His life embodied the era's contradictions, a society enamored with technological advances, yet deeply mystified by death and the afterlife. Thomas's attempts to harness electricity to defy mortality mirrored broader cultural anxieties about the limits of human knowledge and the ethical boundaries of experimentation. His narrative became a case study in the perils and promises of scientific ambition during a time when the modern world was still taking shape. The public's fascination with Thomas persisted, fueled by the haunting photograph taken during his brief tenure in the hospital, a portrait capturing the solemn gaze of a boy burdened by intellect and sorrow. This image became emblematic, reproduced in newspapers and pamphlets, and later invoked in discussions about genius and madness. To many, Thomas represented the archetype of the tragic prodigy, a symbol of human aspiration and the costs it can exact. Modern reinterpretations of Thomas's life often frame him as a figure caught between the realms of science and the supernatural, his story straddling fact and myth. Some scholars propose neurological explanations, suggesting that rare cognitive conditions or savant-like abilities may have contributed to his extraordinary knowledge and behavior. Others view his case through psychological lenses, interpreting his obsession with death as a manifestation of trauma and unresolved grief. These multifaceted perspectives underscore the complexity of his experience and resist simplistic categorization. Thomas Calder's legacy also ignited ethical debates regarding the treatment and protection of gifted children. His story highlighted the dangers of intellectual precocity left unguided, the risks of isolation, and the necessity of sensitive care that balances encouragement with emotional support. His life became a cautionary tale, prompting calls for more comprehensive frameworks to nurture and safeguard young talents, particularly those grappling with profound psychological challenges. Beyond academic and medical spheres, Thomas's narrative resonates as a universal exploration of humanity's eternal quest to transcend mortality. His desperate experiments were not merely scientific endeavors, but expressions of a fundamental desire to overcome the finality that defines human existence. This quest, at once heroic and tragic, reflects an enduring aspect of the human condition, a longing to understand, to persist, and to find meaning in the face of death. The story of Thomas Calder invites ongoing reflection on the boundaries of human potential and the ethical responsibilities that accompany the pursuit of knowledge. It challenges us to consider how society supports its most gifted and vulnerable members, how grief shapes the trajectories of young lives, and how the interplay of science, psychology, and culture informs our understanding of extraordinary individuals. In revisiting Thomas's life, we are reminded that the photograph capturing his solemn presence is more than a historical artifact. It is a testament to the complexities of childhood genius and the profound mysteries that continue to elude explanation. His journey, marked by brilliance and tragedy, beckons us to confront uncomfortable questions about ambition, mortality, and the fragile line separating insight from obsession. As scholarship advances and new perspectives emerge, Thomas Calder remains a compelling figure whose story bridges centuries, disciplines, and human experiences. His legacy endures as both a warning and an inspiration, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is inseparable from the depths of emotion and the complexities of the human soul. The boy who dared to challenge death continues to haunt the collective imagination, a symbol of humanity's relentless drive to explore the unknown, and a poignant emblem of the costs such exploration can entail.